So how do we abide in his love? Well, fortunately, we don't have to guess, because Jesus tells us right here very explicitly in the very next verse, verse 10. He says, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. So Jesus says, if you want to bear fruit, you have to abide in me the same way you abide, a branch abides in the vine. And then he says, you abide in me by abiding in my love. And then he says, you abide in my love by keeping my commandments. And this is where we sometimes get into trouble, because this is where it is really easy to turn legalistic about this. We go, well, he says, if we want to abide in his love, we have to keep his commandments. And so we go to the Bible and we start looking at all the commandments that the Bible says. And guys, the Bible says a lot of commandments. So we have to make sure that we are not sinning. But when you see it that way, that leads us to legalism. And it leads us to a point where we can start to condemn other people. It's like, oh, you're doing XYZ thing? Well, the Bible says don't do that. So therefore, Jesus says, if you keep my commandments, you abide in my love. You're not keeping his commandments, so you're not abiding in his love. And he says, if you're not abiding in his love, then you get thrown into the fires of hell. And the next thing you know, we've condemned a bunch of people we don't like that are doing things that we don't like and told them they're going to hell. That's not what Jesus means here. That's not what Jesus is talking about here. Because Jesus isn't referring to every commandment in the Bible. He's referring to his commandment. And then he tells us exactly what that commandment is in verse 12. We don't have to guess. We don't have to search through the Bible. We don't have to argue over it or debate over it and go, Jesus said this here, and then he said this there, and which does he mean? Like he says it right here in verse 12. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. That's his commandment. That's it. It's that simple. It's about love. And that makes sense, doesn't it? That if we are to abide in the love he has for us, we do that by loving other people the same way he loved us. We love one another. And how did Jesus love us, by the way? Well, he loved us in a self-sacrificing way, in an unconditional way. He loved us while we were yet sinners, before we repented, before we believed, before we changed our lives, before we became better people. He loved us. And then he tells us to love others in the same way. And when we do that, we keep his commandment, and we abide in his love. And when we abide in his love, he tells us we find joy.